The air in the Galactic Council chamber tasted stale, thick with the smell of cold coffee and pure fear. Outside the huge curved viewport, Earth hung silent and beautiful against the black velvet of space, a fragile blue marble under a silent, deadly threat. It was Sunday, February 8th, 2026, a day that should have been quiet, maybe lazy for some back home. Instead, right here, it felt like the last Sunday anyone would ever know. The usual hum of the station was gone, replaced by a low, frantic buzz of voices and the constant, urgent beep-beep of warning systems. Bright red emergency lights pulsed, casting long, jumping shadows on the faces of the people gathered around the central holodable. These weren't just politicians anymore. They were the last hope. The room felt too small, suddenly, for the weight of what was happening. You could feel the panic like a physical thing, heavy in your chest, making it hard to breathe. Everyone knew the Krell were coming. Everyone knew they were bad news. But seeing it happen now, that was different. That was terrifying. On the main display, filling the wall, the nightmare unfolded in cold, hard numbers and flickering lights. The Krell hegemony Armada, a monstrous swarm of jagged, dark ships, had ripped right through the outer defense lines near Jupiter. Like they weren't even there. Human ships, brave little dots of light compared to the Krell behemoths, tried to hold the line near Mars. But it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a sandcastle. One by one, the human fleet markers started blinking out. Poof. Gone. Silent. No explosion visuals. Just a sudden, sickening absence on the screen. Each vanishing light meant thousands of lives, snuffed out in an instant. The numbers scrolled down the side. Human casualties rising. Ships lost. 47. 48. 49. A young officer near the back, voice cracking, reported the impossible. Sol perimeter breached. Repeat. Sol perimeter is gone. Krell main force accelerating towards Earth. Estimated time to orbital engagement under 20 minutes. The words hung in the air, freezing everyone solid. 20 minutes. Less time than it took to grab lunch. Less time than a TV show. That's all Earth had left. The chamber, usually a place of heated debate and compromise, was utterly silent for a few heartbeats. Then the noise erupted again. Louder, sharper. People weren't talking to each other anymore. They were shouting over each other, voices tight with panic. What are our options? Someone yelled. Desperation raw. Options? Another voice shot back, high-pitched. There are no options left. Look at the screen. An older advisor, usually calm, slammed a fist on the holodable, making the coffee cups jump. This is it. This is the end. They're coming for the cities. For everyone. You could see it in their eyes. The dawning horror. The realization that all the plans, all the drills, all the years of building defenses, it had all been for nothing. Against the Krell, it was like building a cardboard fortress against a hurricane. The confidence they'd tried to project earlier in the we can handle this attitude, had evaporated. Now, there was only the raw animal fear of being utterly helpless. Some stared blankly at the screens, faces pale, tears silently tracking through the grime on their cheeks. Others paced like caged animals, muttering prayers or curses under their breath. One woman sat slumped in a chair, head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The weight of billions of lives, the entire future of humanity, rested on these shoulders right now. And those shoulders were buckling. Down in the tactical pit, the techs worked frantically, but their movements were slow, defeated. What was the point? Their screens showed the same grim picture. Krell ships moving with terrifying precision, human ships exploding like fireflies. One tech, her hands trembling so badly she could barely type, whispered to her neighbor, "My kids." They were supposed to go to the park today. Her voice broke. The neighbor just shook his head, unable to speak. Eyes fixed on the display showing the Krell flagship, a monstrous thing shaped like a broken claw, powering up its main weapon. Energy readings spiked off the charts. Everyone in the room saw it. That was the shot, the one that would end everything. The council leader, a man usually known for his steady calm, stood at the head of the table. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge. He looked out at the faces of the people who trusted him to keep them safe. He saw the terror, the hopelessness. He saw the screens showing Earth, so peaceful, so unaware of the hammer about to fall. He took a deep, shuddering breath. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough with emotion, cutting through the frantic noise. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a plan. It was a funeral announcement. "Listen up," he said, his voice cracking on the first word. He cleared his throat, tried again, louder this time. "Listen, everyone. Listen." The room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning to him, waiting for the words that couldn't possibly make this better. He pointed a shaking finger at the main display, where the Krell flagship's weapon glow was now blindingly bright. That is the end of us. Right there. Our fleet is gone. Mars is gone. Jupiter gone. They are coming for Earth. There is nothing left to stop them. He paused, swallowing hard, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. This is the endgame. Repeat, this is the endgame. He didn't say, we surrender. He didn't say, pray. He didn't offer false hope. He just stated the brutal, unavoidable truth hanging in the stale air. Humanity was about to be erased. The screen showed the final human ships, the last desperate stand near the asteroid belt, being swatted aside like flies. The Krell formation tightened, aiming straight for the blue dot of home. The weapon charge on the flagship hit maximum. A collective gasp went through the room. Some closed their eyes. Others stared, frozen, unable to look away from the screen showing their own annihilation. The red emergency lights pulsed faster, matching the frantic beat of every heart in that room. The low hum of the station seemed to deepen, becoming the sound of doom approaching. Outside the viewport, Earth still looked peaceful, unaware. But inside the council chamber, time had stopped. There was only the screen, the blinding light building on the Krell ship, the crushing weight of knowing you were witnessing the final seconds of everything you knew. The coffee was cold. The air was thick with the taste of fear. And the only sound now was the ragged breathing of people waiting for the light to hit, waiting for the end. Sunday, February 8th, 2026, wasn't just a date anymore. It was the day the lights went out. The panic wasn't just in the room. It was the room. It was the only thing left. And it was about to be the last thing anyone ever felt. The silence before the final blow was the loudest sound of all. The blinding flash everyone expected, the one that would turn Earth into a cloud of dust, never came. 1 second, the Krell flagship's weapon was glowing like a tiny sun about to explode, the screen showing Earth's final peaceful blue curve. The next second, silence. Not the silence of death, but a sudden, shocking absence of sound in the room. The frantic beeping of warnings? Gone. The choked sobs? Stopped mid-breath. Even the low hum of the station seemed to hold its breath. Every single person in that chamber was frozen, eyes glued to the main display, waiting for the light that would end everything. Then, the impossible happened. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a ripple in the space behind the massive Krell formation, near the dark side of Mars, where nothing should have been. Like heat haze on a desert road, but in the cold vacuum of space. The ripple spread fast, silent, and smooth. And then they were there. No dramatic explosion of light, no roaring engines tearing through atmosphere. Just there. Dozens, maybe hundreds of ships. But nothing like the jagged, brutal shapes of the Krell, or the familiar curves of human vessels. These were sleek, impossibly dark, like shards of night given form. Smooth, almost organic-looking, absorbing the light around them instead of reflecting it. They moved with a quiet, terrifying grace, sliding into position behind the Krell Armada like shadows detaching from a wall. No signals. No warnings. Just arrival. The young officer near the back, the one who'd reported the breach with a cracked voice, finally found his breath. It came out as a strangled gasp. Sensors. Overloaded. Unknown signatures. Massive energy readings. But no propulsion signature. They just appeared. His hands flew over his console. But the screens only showed chaos, jagged lines, error messages. The sheer impossibility of what was unfolding, before anyone could even process who these newcomers were, or why they were here. The dark ships moved, not with the clumsy, explosive bursts of human or Krell drives, but with a fluid, silent speed that defied physics. One moment they were aligned behind the Krell. The next, they were through them, weaving between the massive Krell warships like ghosts through walls. Then, the light came. But it wasn't the Krell's death ray. Thin, precise beams of pure white energy, silent and deadly, lanced out from the dark ships. Not wild blasts, but surgical strikes. One beam hit the engine cluster of a Krell dreadnought, the size of a small moon, and it simply unraveled. Not an explosion, but a silent internal collapse. Metal flowed like liquid, lights winked out, and the colossal ship folded in on itself, vanishing into a silent point of darkness before the debris even had time to scatter. Another beam sliced through the spine of a Krell carrier, cleaving it cleanly in two. The halves drifted apart, dark and dead. No fire, no dramatic fireworks, just sudden, absolute silence where a city of warships had been docked. It happened faster than anyone could blink. One Krell ship gone. Then two. Then 5. 10. The screen, moments ago filled with the terrifying advance of the Krell Armada, became a horrifying ballet of silent annihilation. The dark fleet moved with impossible coordination, each ship a silent predator, each strike perfectly placed. Human ships, the few shattered remnants still drifting near the asteroid belt, were ignored completely. The dark fleet's attention was solely, utterly on the Krell. A woman in the tactical pit dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, the sound shockingly loud in the stunned silence of the room. No one looked down. Everyone was staring, mouths agape, eyes wide with disbelief that was rapidly turning into something else. Relief? Maybe. But deeper, colder. What is this? The council leader, who had moments ago announced the endgame, stood rigid at the head of the table. His knuckles were still white on the edge, but his face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. The color had drained from his cheeks, then rushed back in a wave. He wasn't looking at the Krell anymore. He was staring at the dark ships, his mind visibly struggling to grasp the scale of what he was seeing. The sheer ease of it. The Krell, the monsters who had crushed humanity's best defenses like paper, were being erased with the casual flick of a wrist. A low murmur started, then grew. Not cheers. Not yet. It was the sound of hundreds of people trying to make sense of the impossible. Did they just... Who are they? How? How did they do that? Someone whispered, voice trembling. They saved us. But the words hung in the air, heavy with doubt. Did they? Then, the Krell flagship, the monstrous claw-shaped vessel that had been powering up its world-ending weapon, tried to fight back. A massive energy bolt, the kind that had vaporized human cruisers, lanced out towards the nearest dark ship. It hit dead center and bounced off. Not deflected. not absorbed in a flash of light. It simply slid around the dark vessel like water around a stone, dissipating harmlessly into space. The dark ship didn't even slow down. It just kept moving, its own silent beams continuing their work. Another Krell battleship, trying to turn and flee, was caught in a net of white light and dissolved into nothingness. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. This wasn't a battle. This was a demonstration. A massacre. And humanity wasn't the victim this time. But they weren't the heroes either. They were just there. Witnesses to a power so vast, so alien, it made the Krell look like children playing with toy soldiers. The frantic panic of minutes ago hadn't vanished. It had transformed. The crushing weight of imminent death was gone, replaced by a new, deeper, more chilling dread. Relief tried to bubble up. We're alive. But it was instantly smothered by the terrifying question. Why? Are they? Are they with us? Someone stammered near the front, hope warring with terror in their voice. With us? A grizzled veteran officer barked, his voice rough but cutting through the murmurs. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen where a Krell cruiser silently imploded. Look at that. That's not helping. That's erasing. They didn't come to save us. They came to wipe them out. And we were just in the way. His words landed like stones. The hope in the room flickered and died. The young officer at the back finally looked up from his console, his face pale. No comms, sir, nothing. They're not responding to any hails. Not human, not whatever Krell signals might be left. They're just scanning us. He swallowed hard. They're sensors. They're focused on Earth, on the station. Right now. A collective shiver went through the room. The dark fleet wasn't just ignoring them. It was studying them, like scientists examining an interesting bug under a microscope. The silence returned, but it was different now. Thicker, heavier. The red emergency lights still pulsed. But the color felt wrong. Not the urgent red of danger, but the cold red of a warning light you don't understand. Someone near the viewport let out a shaky breath. They saved Earth. She whispered, more to herself than anyone. But why? The council leader finally spoke, his voice low, raw. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking out the viewport, past the dark fleet, towards the fragile blue planet hanging in the distance. His usual calm was shattered, replaced by a profound, unsettling fear. Why save us? Why not just finish the job while they were here? Why leave us alive? He turned slowly, his eyes sweeping the room, meeting the terrified gazes of the people who looked to him for answers he didn't have. They have the power to end us with a thought. They just proved it. So what do they want? The question hung in the stale air, heavier than the panic that had come before it. The immediate threat was gone. The Krell were being systematically, silently, wiped from the sky. But the dark ships remained, their obsidian hulls glinting faintly with reflected starlight, utterly indifferent to the cheers starting to ripple through the lower levels of the station, cheers that sounded hollow and desperate. Up here in the council chamber, the woman who had been crying silently earlier wiped her face, but her eyes weren't filled with relief anymore. They were wide with a new kind of terror. She looked at the man next to her, her voice barely audible. They stopped the Krell. But what if they're the real storm? He didn't answer. He just stared at the main display, where the last few Krell ships were being reduced to silent clouds of debris, and then at the dark fleet, now turning their attention fully towards Sol System. The silence of the chamber wasn't the silence of safety. It was the silence of prey realizing the hunter has paused, but hasn't gone away. The panic hadn't ended. It had just changed shape, becoming colder, sharper, and infinitely more frightening. The unknown wasn't just out there anymore. It was here, and it was looking right at them. And nobody had the first clue what it saw. The silence in the council chamber wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick, like the air after a thunderstorm, but charged with something worse than lightning-pure cold dread. 1 minute, everyone was bracing for the end. The next, the Krell were gone, vanished, wiped out by silent dark ships that moved like shadows. Relief should have flooded in, but it didn't. Instead, a new kind of fear took root. Deeper, sharper, because these saviors, they weren't supposed to exist. People stood frozen, staring at the main display. The Krell Armada, those jagged, terrifying monsters that had crushed humanity's fleet like tin cans, was just gone. In its place, the sleek, obsidian shapes of the unknown fleet hung in space near Mars. No explosions. No victory cheers crackling over comms. Just eerie stillness. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the room's occupants and the faint, nervous tapping of fingers on consoles. Someone dropped a datapad. The clatter made half the room jump. A young woman near the back, just a junior analyst. Nobody important, finally broke the silence. Her voice was a shaky whisper, but it cut through the room like glass. They just erased them. She wasn't looking at the screens anymore. She was staring out the viewport, toward Earth, hanging safe and blue in the distance. Like it was nothing. Like swatting a fly. Her hands trembled at her sides. What if we're the next fly? That's when the panic truly began. Not the wild, shouting kind from before. This was quieter. More dangerous. It started in the gut. A slow, sickening realization. We're not safe. We're just... Notice dot down in the tactical pit. The techs weren't celebrating. They were frantically rerouting sensors, trying to get a closer look at the unknown fleet. One man wiped sweat from his brow with a shaking hand. No heat signatures, he muttered to his neighbor, voice tight. No engine trails. Nothing. It's like they're not even using power. How is that possible? His neighbor just shook his head, eyes wide. And they scanned us, he whispered back. Right after the Krell, like we're specimens. Up at the main halotable, the council leader, the man who just minutes ago announced the end of everything, was pacing. Not his usual calm, measured steps. This was frantic, animal. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it sticking up wildly. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He stopped pacing suddenly, slamming a palm down on the table. The sharp crack made everyone jump. Options! He barked, his voice raw. What are our options now? It wasn't a question. It was a plea. Do we hail them? Send a message? A signal? A wave? He gestured wildly toward the viewport. What do you do when gods drop out of the sky and save your life? Then just stare at you. Silence answered him. Not respectful silence. The silence of utter helplessness. An older advisor, usually the voice of calm reason, spoke up, his voice thin with fear. We don't know they saved us, sir. Maybe. Maybe they just cleared the Krell out of the way. Like clearing brush before building. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. What if we're the brush? A murmur rippled through the room. Nods. Shaken heads. Someone near the door quietly vomited into a waste bin. The smell of bile mixed with the stale coffee. Nobody cared. The thought was too big, too terrifying. What if the monsters we feared weren't the worst thing out there? Outside the chamber, the station was buzzing, but it wasn't the buzz of victory. It was the buzz of confusion and fear spreading like a virus. In the mess hall, a cook stood frozen by the stove, a pot of soup boiling over, spilling onto the hot plate with a loud hiss. She wasn't looking at the mess. She was staring at a small screen mounted on the wall, replaying the silent destruction of the Krell fleet. Her hands were pressed flat against the counter, knuckles white. "They saved Earth," she whispered to no one, tears welling. "But why? Why us? Why not just let the Krell have us? Why bother?" She turned off the burner with a shaky hand. The soup was ruined. Nothing felt right anymore. Back in the chamber, the tension was snapping. A military commander, still in his battle-stained uniform, slammed his fist on the holotable, making the coffee cups rattle. "We need to act. Fortify the stations. Evacuate the cities. Something." His face was red, veins standing out on his temples. "They could turn on us any second. Look at what they did." "And do what, General?" snapped a scientist, her voice brittle with exhaustion. She gestured at the display showing the unknown fleet's impossible ships. "Fire our toys at that? They'd swat our missiles like gnats. We have nothing, not even a way to talk to them." She ran a hand over her face, looking suddenly very old. "We're not just outgunned. We're incomprehensible to them. Like ants trying to reason with a boot." The words hit hard. Incomprehensible. It wasn't just about weapons. It was about meaning. Why had they come? Why destroy the Krell? Why leave Earth untouched? The questions swirled, each more terrifying than the last. Were they kind? Cruel? Did they even think like living things? Or were they just machines? Ancient guardians? Hungry predators playing with their food? A young man, barely out of training, stood near a console, staring at his hands. They were still shaking. He thought of his little sister, probably watching cartoons right now on Earth, blissfully unaware that the world had almost ended, and then been saved by something even scarier. "They could have killed us too," he said quietly, so quietly most couldn't hear. But the people nearest him did. They turned. When they were fighting the Krell, our ships were right there, drifting, broken. They saw us. They could have fired and just ended it. But they didn't. He looked up, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. Why not? What makes us worth spare? That question hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. It wasn't just fear of attack anymore. It was fear of purpose. What did these beings want with a planet they'd spared? Were they studying us? Protecting us for some future use? Or just waiting? The unknown was 1,000 times worse than the Krell's known brutality. At least with the Krell, you knew they wanted to conquer. With these, nobody had a clue. The council leader stopped pacing. He walked slowly to the main viewport, his back to the room. He stared out at the stars, at the dark shapes of the unknown fleet hanging silently against the black. His shoulders slumped. The fight was gone out of him, replaced by a crushing weight. He spoke, not loudly, but everyone heard him. "We spent our whole lives," he said, his voice rough, "thinking we were the smartest, strongest things in the sky. We built ships. We reached for the stars. We thought we were important." He turned around, his eyes scanning the faces of the people who had trusted him to lead them through the Krell threat. Now, that threat was gone, and he had no map for this. "We weren't even on the map," he whispered. "We were just background noise. And the beings who just erased that noise, they haven't even looked at us properly yet." A woman in the front row, her uniform stained with tears and sweat, let out a soft, broken sound. Not a sob, just the sound of hope finally shattering. She covered her face with her hands. Around her, others did the same. Shoulders shook. Heads bowed. The relief of survival was drowned in a new, suffocating ocean of uncertainty. They were alive. Earth was safe. But the universe had just revealed itself as a place infinitely darker, stranger, and more terrifying than anyone had ever dreamed. The Krell were monsters they understood. These silent, dark ships? They were the unknown made real. And the unknown wasn't just scary. It was hungry for answers they couldn't give. The panic wasn't about dying anymore. It was about living in a world where you weren't the top of the food chain, where you were small, helpless, and being watched by eyes you couldn't even see. The silence in the chamber wasn't the calm after the storm. It was the quiet before the real terror began, the terror of knowing you weren't alone, and that whatever was out there was so far beyond you, it might as well be a god. And gods, as everyone knew, didn't always care about the ants beneath their feet. The fleet outside wasn't a shield. It was a question mark hanging over humanity's head, and nobody had the first clue how to answer it. The fear now wasn't sharp and sudden. It was slow, deep, like ice water seeping into your bones. And it wasn't going away. Not ever. The galaxy wasn't just big anymore. It was alive. And it was looking right at them. The waiting was the worst part. 3 days. 72 hours of staring at those silent, dark ships hanging in space like vultures circling a wounded animal. No movement, no signals. Just watching. The initial shock of survival had worn off, leaving behind a raw, grinding fear that settled deep in everyone's bones. Relief? Gone? Hope? Buried. All that was left was the slow, sickening dread of not knowing why they were still alive. The Krell were gone, vanished like smoke, but the thing that erased them hadn't left. It just stayed. And that was somehow worse. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, the air felt thick enough to choke on. The same stale coffee smell from Sunday morning still lingered, but now it mixed with the sour tang of sweat and the metallic taste of pure anxiety. People moved like ghosts, slow and heavy. No one shouted anymore. The frantic energy of panic had burned itself out, replaced by a numb exhaustion. Eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, fixed on the main display showing the unknown fleet. Every flicker of light on the screen made hearts jump. Was it a weapon powering up? A signal? The beginning of the end? People flinched at their own shadows. A dropped pen sounded like a gunshot down in the station's lower levels. It was worse. In the cramped crew quarters, families huddled together. A mother bounced a restless toddler on her knee, humming a shaky lullaby, her eyes constantly darting to the small screen on the wall, replaying the silent destruction of the Krell fleet. She whispered, more to herself than the child. It's okay. We're safe. But her voice trembled. Safe. How could they be safe when something that powerful was just there? Outside the viewport, Earth looked peaceful, blue, and utterly vulnerable. The thought of those dark ships turning their attention down there made her stomach twist into knots. She pulled the toddler closer, burying her face in his soft hair, breathing in the innocent smell of baby shampoo, a tiny anchor in a world gone mad. Back in the council chamber, the tension was a living thing. The council leader hadn't slept. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot pits of worry. He stood by the viewport, not looking at the fleet, but at Earth. He traced the curve of the planet with his eyes, remembering childhood trips to the ocean, the smell of rain, the sound of laughter in a park. Things that felt impossibly distant now. What are you waiting for? He thought, the question screaming silently in his head. Just end it. Or tell us why you're here. Anything but this silence. He turned away, rubbing his temples. The weight wasn't just responsibility anymore. It was the crushing realization that humanity wasn't just not in charge. They were irrelevant. Like ants under a magnifying glass, waiting for the sun to focus. Then, it happened. Not with a bang. Not with a voice. Just a pulse. One of the junior techs near the back, the one who dropped his coffee mug during the attack, jerked upright in his chair. His console screen, which had been scrolling meaningless sensor noise for days, suddenly flared with intense, complex patterns of light. "Sir." His voice was a hoarse croak, barely audible. He cleared his throat, tried again, louder this time. "Incoming. High bandwidth data stream. Origin. Origin is them." He pointed a shaking finger at the display showing the lead dark ship. It's not audio. Not video. Pure data. Massive volume." The room snapped to life, but it wasn't the frantic energy of panic. It was the focused, desperate energy of drowning people spotting a life raft. Scientists and linguists swarmed the text console, crowding around the screen. Fingers flew over keyboards, rerouting the stream, trying to decode it. The data wasn't language. It was information. Raw, complex, and utterly alien. Star maps. Not just Sol system. Dozens of systems. Hundreds. Charts showing the slow, relentless creep of the Krell hegemony. Those jagged lines spreading like cracks across the galactic map, devouring star after star over. Centuries? Millennia? The timeline stretched back further than human history. A linguist, her face pale under the glow of the screen, gasped. "Look, here. At Vega. And Proxima. And Orion's belt." She pointed at specific points on the map. At each location, the Krell's advance line suddenly stopped. Not slowed, stopped. And beside each stop, a new symbol appeared. A stark, simple image. A star, cleanly scarred by a single, jagged line. They weren't just here. She breathed, her voice filled with dawning horror. They were everywhere the Krell attacked. They stopped them. All of them. Just like they stopped them here. The room went utterly still. You could hear the hum of the station's lights. The realization hit like a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue mission for Earth. This wasn't about humanity at all. The unknown fleet hadn't come to save them. They'd come to deal with the Krell. Earth, Sol system. The desperate human fleet fighting for its life. It was all just scenery. Background noise in a much older, much bigger war. The Krell weren't the ultimate monsters humanity had feared. They were just the latest pest in a long line, and the unknown fleet was the exterminator. And humanity? They were the ants caught under the boot when the bug was squashed. A veteran engineer, his hands usually steady as a rock, slammed his fist softly on the console, not in anger, but in utter despair. "We thought we were the main story," he muttered, his voice rough. "The brave defenders. The underdogs fighting the big bad aliens. Turns out." He shook his head, unable to finish. He didn't need to. Everyone felt it. The crushing weight of insignificance. The Krell had wanted to conquer. The unknown fleet didn't even see them as worth conquering. They were just in the way. The data stream continued. More star charts. More timelines. More scars across the map. Then it focused sharply on Sol. Not on Earth. Not on the station. On the Krell fleet's origin point. A distant, unstable star cluster. A place of violent stellar nurseries and cosmic chaos. The data showed the Krell's path from there. A slow, grinding march across the galaxy, consuming everything. And then, the unknown fleet's response. Not a counterattack. Not a battle. Just intervention. Silent, precise, absolute. The Krell Armada near Sol wasn't defeated. It was erased, as casually as wiping dust from a window. Finally, the stream ended. Not with a bang, but a fade. The screens went back to showing the silent, dark ships. But the message was clear. The data wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a warning. It was a receipt. Proof of service rendered. And that single, repeating symbol, the scar across the star, it wasn't a signature. It was a brand. A mark left behind, like a hunter notching his rifle after a kill. This is where we dealt with the problem. This is where the scar is. The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was hollow. The frantic fear of the Krell attack, the desperate hope after the rescue, the gnawing dread of the waiting. It all collapsed into a single crushing truth. Humanity didn't matter. Not to the Krell, who saw them as easy prey. And certainly not to the unknown fleet, who saw them as less than nothing. Just harmless background static in the real conflict. A young woman, the same junior analyst who'd whispered, "What if we're the next fly?" days ago, finally broke down. Not with screams, but with silent tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying for the Krell. She wasn't even crying for Earth. She was crying for the idea of Earth. The idea that humanity was special. That we were the pinnacle of creation, reaching for the stars. That lie was shattered. The galaxy wasn't a place of wonder waiting to be explored. It was a battlefield humanity hadn't even known existed. Policed by beings so far beyond them, they might as well be forces of nature. And humanity was just there. Lucky enough or insignificant enough to be ignored this time. The council leader turned away from the viewport. His face was gray, the lines deeper than anyone had ever seen. He didn't look at the star charts. He looked at the people in the room, the scientists, the soldiers, the leaders, the faces of the ones who had trusted him to protect them. He saw the utter devastation in their eyes. The loss wasn't of life. It was of meaning, of place, of hope. He walked slowly to the center of the room, his steps heavy on the metal floor. When he spoke, his voice was low, raw, stripped bare of all authority. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a plan. It was a confession. "They weren't here for us," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Not for Earth, not for Sol. They were here for them." He gestured weakly towards the display, showing the Krell's erased path. "We weren't saved. We were overlooked. Spared because we were in the way of the real target. Like dust motes in the path of a bullet." He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had signed defense treaties, ordered fleets into battle. Hands that suddenly felt useless. "That scar," he swallowed hard, "is not for us. It's for them. A reminder to whatever comes after the Krell. This is where we stopped you. This is where you become a scar." He raised his head, meeting the eyes of the people around him. The room was utterly silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. "We spent our whole history," he continued, his voice cracking, "thinking we were the center of the story. The heroes. The future. Turns out, we were just background noise. And the beings who just turned off the noise." He paused, the horror of it too big for words. "They don't even know our name. They don't care." He didn't say, "We must prepare." He didn't say, "We will endure." He just stood there, a broken man in a broken room, staring at the screen showing the silent dark ships. The silence after the unknown fleet left wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a house after a storm rips the roof off, quiet, but full of broken things and the raw, open sky. One moment, those dark, silent ships hung near Mars like a bad dream. The next, the space where they'd been was just empty. No flash. No rumble. Just gone. Like they'd never been there at all. And that emptiness? It felt heavier than when they were there watching. Down in the station's main mess hall, the cook who'd let her soup boil over during the Krell attack stood frozen by the stove. The pot was clean now, scrubbed raw. Her hands, usually steady for flipping pancakes at 5 a.m., shook as she wiped the counter. On the wall screen, news feeds showed Earth. Cities lit up. People cheering in the streets, hugging strangers, crying with relief. "We survived the Krell," the headlines screamed. Fireworks burst over Paris, Tokyo, New York. Back on Earth, it was a holiday. A miracle. But up here? On the station where they'd seen the real story. The cheer felt hollow, wrong, like celebrating after a near-miss car crash while ignoring the giant crater in the road that actually saved you. A crater made by something you couldn't see or understand. The cook poured fresh soup into a bowl, her eyes fixed on the screen showing the empty space near Mars. They think it's over, she muttered to the empty kitchen, her voice rough. They think the Krell were the monster. They don't know the monster was the rescue. She stirred the soup slowly. How do you tell your kid the thing that saved us is scarier than the thing that tried to kill us? Outside the viewport, Earth still looked impossibly blue and safe. But the people on the station knew the truth now. The Krell weren't the top of the food chain. They were just lunch. And humanity? We weren't even on the menu. We were the crumbs on the table the real predator didn't bother to brush away. That realization didn't bring panic like before. It brought a deep, cold ache. A feeling like the whole universe had just yawned and stepped over you. In the corridors. People moved slower. Heads down. Shoulders slumped. The usual chatter was gone. You'd see two people meet at a crossroads, start to say hello, then just stop. What was there to say? Glad we didn't get vaporized? Thanks for the cosmic babysitting? A young engineer, the one who'd whispered, "Why spare us?" during the waiting, sat alone in a maintenance closet. He wasn't fixing anything. He was staring at his hands, the hands that built satellites, repaired life support, did human things. Now those hands felt like toys, meaningless. He traced a finger over a grease stain on his coveralls. What's the point of fixing a leaky pipe, he thought, when the whole building could vanish with a thought? The work felt silly, like arranging deck chairs on the Titanic while someone invisible held an axe over the hull. Down on Earth, the celebrations were already fading. Not because people stopped being grateful, they were, but because the questions started. Late at night, after the fireworks died, parents found kids staring out windows. Mom, if the Krell were bad, who were the shiny ships? Are they friends? Simple questions with no good answers. Teachers stood in classrooms, pointing at star charts, suddenly feeling like liars. We're all alone out there, they taught for decades. Now, the galaxy felt crowded and dangerous. Not with enemies you could fight, but with powers so vast, arguing about them was like ants debating the weather. One teacher, trying to explain the mysterious saviors, saw the fear in her students' eyes. Not fear of aliens, but fear of not knowing. Fear that the whole world was built on sand. She stopped mid-sentence, her throat tight. Maybe some things are just bigger than us, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't the answer they wanted. It was the only one she had. Back on the station, the council leader stood again at the main viewport. The frantic energy was gone. So was the despair. Now there was just a deep, bone-tired calm. He watched Earth, tiny and bright. He thought of the data stream, the scar across the stars. It wasn't a warning for humanity. It was a warning for the Krell, and anyone else stupid enough to grow too big, too fast. This is where we stopped you. The message was clear. Don't be a problem, or you become a scar. He turned to the room. People were there, scientists, soldiers, advisors, but they weren't looking at star charts anymore. They were looking at him, waiting, not for a plan to fight, not for a way to talk to gods, just for what comes next. He took a slow breath. The air didn't taste stale anymore. It tasted like dust, like the end of something. We spent our whole lives, he began, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness, thinking the galaxy was ours to explore, ours to conquer, ours to matter in. He paused, reading their eyes, the red-rimmed eyes, the tired eyes, the eyes that had seen too much. It's not. It never was. He pointed not at the stars, but at the floor beneath their feet. This station? Earth? All of us? We're not the main story. We're background noise. And the beings who just cleared that noise. He shook his head slowly. They don't hate us. They don't love us. They don't even see us. Not really. To them, we're like dust on a window. They wipe the Krell off the glass. We just happen to be on the other side. A heavy silence settled. Not shocked. Not angry. Just understood. The lie was gone. The comforting story of human importance was shattered. What was left was bare, uncomfortable truth. So what do we do? Someone finally asked, their voice small. Just wait? Wait for the next monster? Wait for them to come back and decide we're the problem. The council leader looked out at Earth again. Saw the tiny lights of cities. The slow turn of clouds. Life, our life. Small, maybe. Insignificant, probably. But ours. We don't wait, he said, his voice gaining strength. Not loud, just sure. We watch. We learn. We stay quiet. He turned back to the room, his eyes steady. The Krell grew loud. They spread fast. They took what they wanted. And look what happened. He didn't need to point at the empty space on the screen. Everyone saw it. Our job now isn't to be the loudest voice in the room. It's to be the quietest. To be careful. To understand the rules of a game we didn't know we were playing. He walked slowly among them, his boots clicking softly on the metal floor. We plant gardens. We raise kids. We fix pipes. He stopped in front of the young engineer from the maintenance closet. We do the small things. The human things. Because that's all we are. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to stay off the list. They didn't talk about weapons. Or alliances. Or reaching for the stars. He talked about not reaching too far. About tending your own garden while knowing a giant walks past your fence. It wasn't a victory speech. It wasn't hope. It was something quieter, tougher. Acceptance. Later, the cook finished her shift. She walked the quiet corridors, heading for her bunk. Past the main viewport, she stopped. Looked out. Earth hung there, blue and fragile. She thought of her sister down there, probably tucking her kids into bed, still believing the scary part was over. The cook touched the cold glass of the viewport. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, messy hair. A woman who made soup for strangers in space. She didn't feel small anymore. Not exactly. She felt focused. Like when you're lost in a huge forest and you stop trying to see the whole thing. You just look at the next tree. The next step. Down on Earth, a gardener knelt in her soil at dawn, planting seeds. She looked up at the morning star, Venus probably, not thinking about fleets or scars, thinking about whether the tomatoes would get enough sun. Her hands, caked in dirt, worked steadily. Life went on, not because it was safe, not because it mattered to the universe, but because it mattered here, in this patch of dirt. To her up on the station, the young engineer finally got up from the maintenance closet. He walked to a console, not to scan for threats, but to send a simple message to his mom back home. Hey, station's quiet. Fix the air scrubber. Soup's good. Love you. It wasn't much. But it was human. And in a galaxy suddenly full of silent, dark ships and scars across the stars, being human, small, fragile, unimportant human, felt like the only real thing left. The panic was gone. The fear wasn't, but it had changed. It wasn't the fear of the end. It was the fear of forgetting. Forgetting how to be small. Forgetting how to care for your own little corner of the dark. The galaxy was scarred. Earth was a tiny, unmarked spot on the map. And that was okay. because the real job wasn't to be noticed by giants. It was to keep the lights on, to plant the seeds, to make the soup, to say, "I love you," in the quiet dark. That was the only victory left. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The universe didn't care, but they did. And for now, that was all that mattered. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the sound of people breathing, living, trying, together, in the dark.